This is The Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media. Now, here's Jason Jones.
Aloha, everybody, and welcome to The Jason Jones Show, a special weekend edition. I was checking my email today, and I got an email from the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture that they were going to offer their Vita Institute, their pro-life intellectual formation program, this year free to anyone that went to the website and registered. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Notre Dame Center for Ethics and Culture, or the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture at Notre Dame, this Vita Institute, it's very prestigious. They invite influencers, elected officials, filmmakers, university presidents, and professors. They all come together in Notre Dame every summer, and they bring the best theologians, the best and brightest theologians, philosophers, ethicists, bioethicists, and everyone is there together. But this year, because of the COVID shutdown, they're not having it at Notre Dame. They're putting it online in a webinar series. And so if it's going to be in a webinar series, they invited everybody. So the president, Professor Carter Snead, is a friend of mine. So I reached out to him and said, can I interview you right now? He's like, I have to put my kids to bed, and then we can do the show, because I want my audience, I want all of you to go to the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture site. It's in the show notes, and register and participate in this. You are going to be grateful. I went to it in person a couple of times, once as a student and a few times to show movies to the people who were there that I was promoting or I just produced. And so it is an honor to share this with you. This episode is being brought to you by Movie to Movement, promoting a culture of life, love, and beauty through the power of film. Our new movie, Divided Hearts of America, is in post-production now and should be ready for release this fall. Go to movietomovement.com. Check out all of our movies, especially our new one with Benjamin Watson, Divided Hearts of America. It is a special weekend edition with Professor Carter Snead on the 2020 Vita Institute Pro-Life Intellectual Formation Program. Jason Jones Show. Aloha, Professor Carter Snead. Welcome to the Jason Jones Show.
It is a pleasure to be with you, Jason.
Well, sir, I am honored to have you on the show because of you, I am an alum. I tell people, I don't know if it's really true, but I tell people I am an alum of Notre Dame. I'm a domer because I had the privilege of attending the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture several years ago. I'm actually I snuck in like 3 times. I don't know if you know, but it was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life.
Well, we loved having you at the Vita Institute. We're in our 11th year, and we, UK, normally it's a small group of, 40, 50 people, leaders of the pro-life movement from around the world, people in politics, people who run maternal group homes, people who work at crisis pregnancy centers, people who do post-abortive ministries, and grassroots activists and senior executives, physicians, professors from all over the world come and spend a week with us at Notre Dame to learn all the fundamentals of all the subjects that are most relevant to building a culture of life: law, science, philosophy, theology, social science, communication skills. And as you will recall, in addition to the teaching, lecturing, and discussions, it's an amazing opportunity for extraordinary people to meet each other and to network and to build bridges between their different pro-life apostolates around the world.
Yeah, well, in the 12 years now that you've been doing this, so many pro-life leaders have gone to this and they've built friendships, really intimate relationships, got to know each other. For me, it was the same thing. And I'm somebody, I've been in the pro-life movement since I was a 17-year-old high school dropout. Then I put myself through college, went to community college in the University of Hawaii. But I've always been insecure that I haven't had the formation or the knowledge base that I wish that I had to be most useful to go out into the world, whether it's through films or through my writing, to advocate for a culture of life. And so attending your conference for me gave me a lot of information, gave me I was able to build relationships with some of the greatest minds literally in the world. And I felt special. But then I got this email that everyone in the world gets to do this now, and I'm no longer special. Is that what's going on here?
Yeah, I'm afraid that that was the downside of the webinar, is that you're not as special as you used to be, and I'm sorry for that. But that was the cost of making this webinar. No, what this is, I mean, obviously, the University of Notre Dame is obviously where I work. Where I'm a law professor and concurrent professor of political science, but of course I'm the director of the Nicholas Center for Ethics and Culture. And we love bringing people to our beautiful campus every summer, but because of the pandemic, the campus is closed, and but we wanted the Vita Institute to continue, and so we're doing a 5-lecture webinar over 5 different nights, starting on Monday, and people from all over the world can get some of what you got. They can't get the full in-person Vita experience, because you experienced multiple lectures, 8-9 hours a day, as well as evening discussions and cultural events, and the movies that you showed for us, which were really interesting and enriching, and we could talk about those. And we've had and through your influence, we've had a lot of folks who are in the film industry come through the Vita Institute, including all the stars of Unplanned, including we had 3 of the actresses from Unplanned, including the lead actress last year, but so what you got was sort of the Cadillac package. This is a little taste for folks to get their beaks wet.
Everybody. And this is, I was able to bring, thanks to you, my lieutenant governor. The lieutenant governor of Hawaii came to the Vita Institute, which I'm so grateful for. And
it's great having him there.
Okay, so can you tell us what's the mission of this institute? And okay.
Sorry. So the mission of the Vita Institute is exactly what you just described. I mean, you were saying that you were a person who was passionate about the building a culture of life, both through your own tragic experiences and your own your own desire and passion to protect the weak and vulnerable. And obviously, there's no more weak or vulnerable person than the child in the womb, who in our country sadly has no protection of the law against lethal private violence. And what we aim to do is take people like yourself, people who are leaders from around the world, and to spend a week of intensive study and in-class discussion and lectures and also networking and encounter with one another. It's essentially an intellectual boot camp for folks like you and others to really hone their understanding of embryology, of law, social science, all the different academic disciplines that are necessary to be able to understand and make the case in the most potent way possible to our friends and neighbors about the intrinsic equal dignity of the unborn child.
That's beautiful. And what will be the courses that we're going to get over the next week? Because I promise you, I'm going to attend everyone, and I'm going to try to do a FaceTime live with my friends, a watch party. Maybe we can watch it together and talk with each other as we're watching it.
I love it. That's a great idea. Those who sign up for the webinar will be able to ask questions and participate in that form.
Oh, so we'll just do that. We'll go through the web. Yeah. Okay, I didn't know that. So we can go through there, register. We have to register. And we can communicate with you and each other as we're hearing the lectures. That's amazing.
Exactly right. And so these are fun. So, over the course of the week, we have, many more than just 5 lectures. But what we did is we took 5 lectures, and this in some ways is modeled on sort of off-site or satellite Vita Institutes that we've been doing at the invitation of different folks. We've done one in New York. Cardinal Dolan had us out to New York to do a Vita Institute, a one-day Vita Institute in New York. We did one for Archbishop Gomez in LA. We did one for Cardinal DiNardo in Houston for one day. And this is kind of modeled on those satellite compressed versions. So day 1 will be the philosophical case for life. Frank Beckwith, who's a terrific philosopher from Baylor University, who's been writing about this for decades in very, very clear and persuasive ways. He will survey the arguments, sort of pro and con, explain what the principal arguments in favor of abortion are, and then we'll explain why those are internally inconsistent and problematic, and give the viewers all the tools they need to respond to those arguments. Day 2 will be an embryology lecture, the question of when life begins as a biological matter. We're blessed to have Father Nick Austriaco from Providence College. He's a Dominican priest, And he not only has a PhD in moral theology from Freiburg, he has a PhD in molecular biology from MIT. And so he's a practicing bench scientist, molecular biologist, and he is in his person. He sort of combines all the knowledge, theological knowledge, philosophical knowledge, and biological knowledge necessary to explain exactly how it is that the human organism comes to be through sperm and egg fusion. From the moment of conception, there emerges a new living member of the human species that is possessive inviolable dignity, just like you and me. And he lays it all out in a way that is clear and interesting and compelling and gripping. And a lot of people are brought to the pro-life position simply by understanding the biological reality of how human beings come into being. So day 3 will be me. I'll be talking about the law and policy connected to abortion. During the full week, we also get into things like assisted suicide, euthanasia, embryo research. But given this compressed version, we're going to focus on abortion. And I'm going to lay out in detail what the current legal and policy landscape in the United States is with respect to abortion, which is a creature of Supreme Court precedent. The Supreme Court in 1973 arrogated to itself the authority to set the law of abortion for all 50 states in the country, ostensibly by interpreting the 14th Amendment due process clause, which, of course, was adopted to remediate the injustices and horrors of chattel slavery, and says nothing about abortion at all. But somehow, through the lens of 7 justices in 1973, they read into that 1868 provision a right to abortion, even though in 1868 abortion was illegal in almost every single state. Nobody thought that by ratifying the 14th Amendment they were going to be embracing abortion on demand, which is, for reasons I'll explain, the law of the land in the United States. Then we'll have a lecture. The first lecture will be an amazing young woman named Jess Keating, who works with me at Notre Dame. She runs a program at the McGrath Institute for Church Life here at Notre Dame, and she's going to talk about the history of feminism and abortion, and she's going to go into really interesting seminal resources and texts from early feminists, and especially early American feminists, and show how they were themselves passionately pro-life in many respects. Many of them were, and some of the most famous were. And she's going to explain the kind of the turn in feminist philosophical theory towards abortion. She's going to show where that comes from, and she's going to show with a very persuasive critique why that is a misdirection, why in fact feminism, rightly understood, embraces both mother and child in the context of human pregnancy and birth. And then the last lecture will be from my friend, Father John Paul Kimes. Father Kimes is now, thankfully, a professor of law at the University of Notre Dame. He's a professor of practice, teaches canon law at Notre Dame. But for the past 10.5 years, he's been in the Vatican, working for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in Rome, which, and in the disciplinary section, he was a senior canon law prosecutor, and he prosecuted priests who abused children around the world. He's been doing that for the past 10.5 years, but he's a very deep and very holy priest, and he's going to talk about kind of a theological frame to think about a culture of life, and especially drawing upon a lot of Pope Francis's language about the throwaway culture. And he's going to talk about how to resist the throwaway culture and to sort of tie together all the different disparate strands that we're going to lay on the table in the course of the 4 preceding lectures.
It really couldn't be more timely, because I've always thought that the disunity in our country has always been because of our failure to live up to our founding principle. So those 3 brutal denials of the founding principle that we are endowed by God with inalienable rights, first slavery, then segregation, now abortion, that is what's been really at the heart of our disunity. And so in the midst of what we're living through right now, that's very sorrowful for us as a nation, to have this conference which celebrates the incomparable beauty of the human person. Then you bring up that the right to abortion was found in the 14th Amendment. I'm conspiratorial. I can't help but think that those judges were winking at Margaret Sanger when they found the right to abortion in the 14th Amendment. Am I crazy to think that?
I don't know. I don't know what they were thinking. I mean, I think that they weren't. Justice Blackmun himself was worked for the Mayo Clinic. He was from Minneapolis. He was put on the court he was put on the court early, just slightly before the case came on, and he was a guy who I don't know, he just didn't see. I mean, whether it was willful blindness or just blindness, he couldn't see. He had no moral imagination. He couldn't see the unborn child in the womb, and there's parts of that opinion that are so unbelievably dense and obtuse, talking about personhood, both in its constitutional meaning, but also in its moral meaning. He claims not to take a position. He and his colleagues claim not to take a position on who counts as a person, but then in the next breath, they talk about potential life, which is, of course, biologically incoherent, since life begins at conception as a basic matter of basic embryology. But then also the whole opinion turns on the proposition that the moral and legal standing of the unborn child has to be categorically subjective, right? The state may not protect the unborn child by reasoning of that opinion, which means that if the state can't treat you like a person, then the court has declared you to be a non-person. And when we shrink the circle of personhood and when we close off the boundaries of the moral and legal community, it's never ever a good thing. It's never a good thing. It's never historically been a good thing. Excluding our fellow brothers and sisters from the circle of humanity is always a disastrous and horrific act. And I think that it's a very Roe v. Wade itself is a very strange case. I mean, the case started in 1973 in Texas, and it was because of some strange procedural context, which I don't need to get into. The case was initially heard by 3 district court judges, 3 trial judges. Okay, normally there's a hearing, there's evidence presented, there's the adversarial process to test the veracity of evidence. But in this case, those 3 judges disposed of the case as a matter of law. They never had a hearing. They never took any evidence. They never talked about history or science or anything like that. And then because of the statute pursuant to which those judges heard the case, it went straight to the Supreme Court. And when Justice Blackmun wrote the opinion, there was no trial record. There was no factual record. Everything he says about history, about science, about medicine is entirely made up by him, and without the testing for veracity in the adversarial process. So the most consequential opinion of the 20th century, or one of the most consequential opinions, certainly the latter part of the 20th century, is founded on no trial record. It's entirely made up out of whole cloth by Justice Blackmun, who relied in part on an article written by the general counsel of NARAL, a man named Cyril Means, who wrote an article falsely claiming that the law in the United States had never protected unborn children until the middle of the 19th century, and then even then it wasn't because of their own because of their moral standing, which is completely belied by the historical record. But Blackmun just took it on board and regurgitated it in the opinion.
Yeah, no, that's something I learned in working on a movie that my daughter actually starred in, where it was on a young woman who worked in brothel in the out west in the 19th century. And that's where I discovered the role that the American Medical Association played in protecting women from abortion. And it was also it was intimately connected to legislation to protect women from human sex trafficking. This is back in the 19th century. It was to stop the brothels and where the abortions took place.
And so here's another interesting fact. So 1868, the 14th Amendment is ratified, right? The whole point of the 14th Amendment is to, and the 15th Amendment and the 13th Amendment is to make up for the original sin of slavery in the American Republic, right? Is to try to do something to remediate the wickedness of chattel slavery, to the wickedness of the coercive and egalitarian regime that we had put in place.
Professor, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I apologize. I was saying in 1868, the 14th Amendment was adopted along with the other amendments of that year to remediate the wickedness of slavery, the wickedness of the coerced and egalitarian regime that we put in place in the years that came before it. And so they passed the 14th Amendment, and then a couple months after Ohio and the other states ratified the 14th Amendment, Ohio criminalized abortion from conception on the grounds that it was child murder. Okay, and you can read it in the legislative proceedings of the state legislature, and the idea that the 14th Amendment prevents states and the federal government from protecting unborn children could not be. I mean, to read that into the 14th Amendment is to basically have a view of constitutional interpretation that is utterly unbounded and allows the judge himself to import his own political program into the, through the process of judicial review. And in fact, it's funny because one of the justices, Lewis Powell, in his memoirs, this is interesting, said after Roe v. Wade, he said, well, the only people that are really unhappy about this decision are Catholics, and they'll get over it. And it's in his memoir. So there's a kind of strange anti-Catholic thread that runs through the history of this as well. And in fact, in the early 1970s, when these issues were swirling and other bioethical questions were emerging on the public landscape, in the Washington Post, they speculated that there are two populations that have special problems with abortion and who are opposed to abortion, and that is the African American community and Catholics. But everybody else is willing to go along. And obviously that changed over time. The evangelical Christians switched their position to embrace a pro-life position eventually, and became very stalwart partners in the struggle to build a culture of life.
Well, on that note, I want to, you're in our new movie, Divided Hearts of America, starring Benjamin Watson. And also in our movie is Katrina Jackson. And so she wrote a bill that became law that was signed by Governor Bell Edwards, who, you won't believe this, him and I served in the Army together in the same unit. How unbelievable. Wow. I was in 127 Wolfhounds. He was in 427 Wolfhounds right across the quad. And so here we have two Democrats, a bill written by an African-American Democrat, signed by a Democrat, although a Wolfhound, who are Wolfhounds. Now, the Supreme Court heard this. Now, what is this? What is the name of this case?
The case is called June Medical Services. Is the name of the case.
Okay, and are they going to be ruling this month?
They will be. Yes, exactly. I don't remember if you were with us that year at the Vita Institute, but we always have consequential Supreme Court decisions announced at the Vita Institute because it usually corresponds to the last period of when the Supreme Court announces their final decisions of the year of that term. And I don't remember if you were there when they announced Hellerstedt, but we were all together in the room together when we found out that the Supreme Court had struck down the portion of the Texas statute that required physician admitted privileges and compliance with ambulatory surgical center regulations. And that was a 5-3 decision. Justice Scalia had passed away. And in that decision, Justice Breyer, who was on the left, of course, and supports abortion rights, announced a new test that when a state seeks to protect women, protect their health and safety by regulating abortion, he announced a rule that said the Supreme Court itself, without deference to the states, will evaluate the benefits of these laws as they see them, and they will weigh those benefits against the burdens as they see them on access to abortion, and then just make a decision as to whether or not the law should be struck down, which, as you can imagine, transforms the court into what Justice White said, and I'm paraphrasing, a kind of abortion regulation committee for the entire country. And of course, that's not what the 14th Amendment says, and it's not what the founders understood, or anybody understood or intended by that provision of the Constitution. But that's what Justice Breyer did. And in this case, June Medical Services, the state of Louisiana passed a law, an admitting privileges law, requiring abortionists to have admitting privileges within a certain geographic radius of where they perform abortions. And on its face, it seems pretty similar to the law that that was struck down in the Texas case, although there are some important factual distinctions between the two. They're different. Privileging works differently in Louisiana than it does in Texas. There are other factual details that one could distinguish the law in Louisiana from the law in Texas, and that might be what the court does. The court might simply say, this Louisiana law is different from the Texas law, and we're going to affirm it, and it can continue in effect. Or it would be surprising to me if they struck it down, but they might. That's a possibility. And then there's another interesting question that's presented in this case, which is whether or not abortion providers have standing. That is, can they bring lawsuits on behalf of women rather than requiring the women to bring the lawsuits in their own names? In a case like this, where there's obviously a conflict of interest, the abortion clinics don't want to be regulated for safety. and the regulations for safety are for the sake of women. So the interest of women, the interest of the abortion clinics are at odds. And so should we reconstruct the laws of standing, the laws of who can bring these lawsuits, to exclude third-party standing, to exclude abortion clinics, and saying if you want to challenge these laws, the women themselves who are whose rights are burdened should bring the suit, not the abortion clinics, not the abortion doctors. And if they do that, that could have a significant impact on the way these laws are challenged, and it would be quite a setback for the abortion rights litigation advocacy efforts.
And if that happens, our country's already a powder keg. I mean, what's going to happen in the streets? I could just see groups like Antifa losing their mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. It's hard to know. I mean, one of the arguments in 1992, when the Supreme Court affirmed what they described as the core holding of Roe, although they changed some formal aspects of it, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, one of the reasons they gave for not overturning Roe was because they were worried that the court's legitimacy would be called into question if it changed the law of abortion, because people think of that as capitulating to political pressure. Of course, that cuts both ways. If the court sustains manifestly unjust and law that's untethered to the Constitution, that also strikes a lot of us as being a capitulation to political pressure. So there's really a no-win situation there. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see. What happens in terms of the political context. I think the justices should be courageous. I think they should. I mean, we've insulated them politically for a reason. They don't stand for election for a reason, so they can interpret the Constitution as it stands and not think about things like that. They're not supposed to think about things like that. They're not supposed to be a political branch. And so it seems to me that the justices should stand firm and draw the conclusion that the Constitution requires.
Yeah,
because listen, I mean, let me just say one last thing. I mean, Brown versus Board of Education is one of the greatest moments in the history of the Supreme Court, right? When they came together unanimously to strike down a wicked regime of segregation in schools around the country. And that certainly was socially disruptive, right? But it was the right thing to do. And they were overturning a precedent that's older than Roe v. Wade was, Plessy versus Ferguson. And the court had showed great courage in that moment and did the right thing, despite the fact that there were regions of the country that were entrenched in their segregation arrangements. And they said, you know what, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you've relied upon. It doesn't matter how you've constructed your education systems. This is unjust. This is wrong, and it's unconstitutional, and we're going to take it down.
Well, my worry is, my job is to change culture. Your job is to change laws. And one of my talking points, but I believe it, is that that Roe v. Wade so undermines our founding principle that our republic cannot last another 40 years of Roe v. Wade, that we will collapse because it destroys the vision of the human person on which our country is founded on. And people like me,
Roe v. Wade, sorry, go ahead.
People like me who no, that's okay. People like me who raise money to make movies are fond of telling people that politics is upstream of culture. It's more important to change culture than laws. We quote Damon of Athens that I care not who write the laws of the city, if you give me the privilege to write the songs. But as somebody who makes movies, who works to change culture, I can tell you, nothing changes culture more than changing the law.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The law is deeply, deeply pedagogical. The law doesn't just reflect what a given people care about and what they're afraid of and what they want to do and what they value. The law shapes, for better or worse, and frequently it's for worse, the law shapes the way people see the world and what they understand justice to entail and what equality is and who's entitled to fairness and what freedom is. And Roe v. Wade, what Roe v. Wade did was to 7 unelected justices said that our Constitution, the document that creates our government, the document that defines the relationship between the branches of government and defines the inalienable rights of the people, they claimed that document, and not just that document, but the provision of that document meant to deal with radical, brutal inequality of slavery. That document, that provision says that we are forbidden to protect with the organs of the state with the coercive power of the state, the weakest member of the human family, the child in the womb. That's what they said. They said our Constitution prevents us from protecting the child in the womb, and nothing could be more corrupt than that. Nothing could be more wicked than that, and it has to change. We cannot respect ourselves as a country if we believe, if we affirm, if we let stand the proposition that our founding document prevents us from protecting the weakest among us.
Well, that's why I thank you, Carter. When we return legal protection to the child in the womb and her mother, we will change it'll change it'll change immigration policy. It'll change foreign policy. It'll change how we wage war. It'll change how we police. All these things people are concerned about, they're grounded in how we understand the human person and how we understand how the law's relation to the vulnerable. And so
that's exactly right.
The first milestone into a culture of life is overturning Roe versus Wade. It's not the last. It's the very, very first.
It's the bare minimum, and it's inadequate, but it's the bare minimum. And the truth is that at the core of a culture of life, at the core of the principle that you and I espouse as people who are trying to build a culture of life, are the principles of radical hospitality, of unconditional love and acceptance, of solidarity, of intrinsic equal dignity. And these principles are generative of other goods and dispositions and virtues that will extend protection beyond the unborn child to embrace the immigrant, the refugee, the prisoner, our enemies, everybody. Like, the bottom line is, and the thing is that, and as you said before, I mean, I can give lectures, I can lay out the laws, I can make arguments, but the truth is the prophetic witness of people who are committed to radical love of neighbor, of the other, regardless of who he or she is, regardless of their conditions. Which is why Mother Teresa Saint Mother Teresa had more credibility than I'll ever have, because she held people as they died, the people that were shunned, the people who were thrown out in the gutter. She picked those folks up and treated them like they were Jesus Christ. And when she stood up at the National Prayer Breakfast and said, abortion has to end, it's violence against the child, the greatest injustice facing our world, she had a kind of credibility and a prophetic witness that I don't have and can't have, because she lived to the fullest extent the entailments of the core principles of the culture of life.
Yeah, that's true. And have you heard the story about Yancey, the evangelical writer who was with President Clinton after that speech?
No.
He asked President Clinton, so what do you think about what Mother Teresa had to say to you? And President Clinton responded, I cannot argue with the life so beautifully lived.
No. And he vetoed partial birth abortion twice.
No, and that's the problem. He couldn't argue with it, so he just ignored it. But what that told me is, I fail at it, but I said, okay, I want to try to be an objective. I want people to know, I want to be like Mother Teresa. I think we all aspire to be that our just how we live our life shows people that we recognize that they have this incomparable dignity. I love something C.S. Lewis said, that God must give us some sort of veil over our eyes so we don't see the human person as the human person really is. Because if we could see the human person as what they are, the most precious thing in the created universe, we couldn't walk down the street. We would fall to our knees in awe at every person we came across. And
that's right.
And I'm sure this happens to you. I think the grace of working in our movement is you kind of get that veil removed, that the constant advocating for the incomparable beauty of the human person, it's kind of, I think sometimes I do the spiritual exercise in airports where I look at everyone and I say to myself, made in the image of God, the most beautiful thing in the cosmos. And everyone I see, and you can get almost to a point of ecstasy that when you realize you're surrounded by all these human beings. And I see that is really our mission.
That's really true. And Jason, you said this to me years ago. You used the phrase, the Apostolate of Friendship. And that's the core of the whole thing. And people, we will transform hearts and minds through genuine friendship, for genuine love of the other, making their good our good. And that's how hearts are going to be softened, and that's how people are going to see the truth. And you have friends that are, pro-choice. I have friends who are pro-choice, and we just have to love them into the light of the truth. And it's not coercive, and it's not manipulative or instrumental. It's just by virtue, and eventually a person, by receiving unconditional love and uncalculated giving from another, their heart's going to soften. I really believe that. And we have to think, I think, in terms of the encounter and the other individual. You know, you and I think about things on large scales. We can get really disappointed. We can look at polls, or you can look at election returns, or the rhetoric of different politicians, and kind of get like, this is never going to work. The truth is, you just start with the person that's right in front of you. And of course, policy, law, all politics, all important. But really where the work is done is the person right in front of you, and changing their heart.
Whether it's, you know, when I was working at Home Depot trying to make everyone on the night shift pro-life, and one of my friends ended up not having an abortion with his girlfriend. 2, I was in a car with a friend who's a member of Congress, who is a Democrat, who was wrestling with whether or not to vote on this bill. And I said, I think my friend helped write that bill. That was you. And we called you, and you tried to convince her to support the bill. It didn't work, but it doesn't always work.
Right.
But the Apostolate of Friendship is, I'm not friends with these people because I want to merely to influence them, but being a friend is a great way to influence people. And I'm grateful for you being my friend, and I'm grateful for the work that your center does, which I think, I don't want to get you in trouble for saying this, it's the most important institute at Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is one of the most important universities in the world. So thank you very much for your work. And
well, thank you.
Now, is there a reading list? We're all going to do this, guys. I'm going to put in the show notes how you can click on and attend the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture's seminars this week. What should we go read right now? Is there a reading list associated with it, or what one book would you have us read, Professor?
It doesn't assume anything. Well, first of all, what I would do is I would tell everybody to go pre-order my book, which will be available on October 13th.
Oh, that's right.
I'm
going to pre-order it right now.
Thank you, and feel free to include it for your listeners. It's called "What It Means to Be Human: The Case for the Body in Public Bioethics," which grapples with the issues of abortion, assisted reproduction, and end-of-life decision-making, and tries to make the case for a full anthropology that reflects our lived embodied reality, and to build laws on top of that, and to criticize the current legal framework as being built on a false anthropology of expressive individualism. We can talk about that more later, but please direct people to that. And I would say, no background knowledge is assumed or required to participate in these seminars. And if people want to, they can circle back with me. We can talk again, and I'll give you some follow-up reading.
Yeah, I can't wait. We're going to have, maybe we'll have you back on in a week or two to do that, to do a follow-up on that, and then you can come back in the fall and talk about your book. Professor
Fantastic.
Carter Snead, thank you for all the work that you've done.
Thank you for the work you do, Jason.
Decade after, year after year, working to advance the dignity of the most vulnerable member of the human family, the child in the womb. I'm very grateful to you. I don't have I remember in college, when I was an undergrad, I was debating. I knew I wanted to order my life to protecting the child in the womb, and I thought, am I going to do it through media or law? And I was like, if I become a lawyer, I will probably end up in prison. I'm probably not going to be a good lawyer. I think that's a bad path. But as someone who chose to go into media, I recognize law is the single most important place for people who want to defend the vulnerable. It's challenging. It's hard. You can go years and years and years with not seeing the fruit of your work. And so I'm grateful for your fortitude, your commitment, and your discipline to protecting the vulnerable. And how blessed are we to live in this republic where just two guys like me and you, we had very similar childhoods, could be in a place where we can influence this and defend the vulnerable.
It's true. Well, you take care, and thanks to all your listeners. And come see us at Notre Dame when we're open, and come virtually on Monday to our webinar.
All right. You can drop off, Professor Snead. I know it's late over there, and I'm going to wrap the show up.
All right. Thanks so much, Jason.
All right. Aloha. All right, guys. You all need to go into the show notes. This is, when I saw the email, I knew that it's a short window. When I saw the email that this Monday and all week, the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture is opening up the courses for free to everyone, I thought I have to have Professor Carter Snead on the show. I'm trying to read the website with my old man eyes. So it's it's ethicscenter.nd.edu, but I'm going to put it in the show notes. ethicscenter.nd.edu, or just go to the show notes. And I can promise you that I've already put this on my calendar. I am going to pre-order Professor Snead's book, and I will be watching all of these lectures, and maybe I'm going to invite some of these folks on as guests, and we can have them continue with the discussion, what they were talking about in their lectures. So this has been a special weekend edition of the Jason Jones Show, and I will be talking to you on Monday. This episode has been brought to you by Movie to Movement, promoting a culture of life, love, and beauty through the power of film, and Movie to Movement's The Great Campaign, Movie to Movement's The Vulnerable People Project. You can go to our website, thegreatcampaign.org, and for a donation of $20 or more, you get a free copy of my book with John Smirak, The Race to Save Our Century. Do more if you can. $20 is what it cost us to package it and ship it and get it to you. Until next time, the Jason Jones Show.
This has been the Jason Jones Show, powered by Mudhouse Media.